Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckham. My next guest is Julian Carlos Gomez. Julian has been a friend of mine for over 25 years. He's one of my closest friends. Julian grew up as a rancher and went to Texas A&M. Then he got a law degree, and after graduating from law school, Julian clerked for 2 federal judges and then founded his own law firm, the Julian C. Gomez Law Firm, in 2002. Julian's law firm is designed to make his clients' lives better. That's his whole focus, and he's very, very good at what he does. In addition to being a lawyer, Julian is also an avid outdoorsman, skier. He's the best tarpon fly fisherman that I know, and is a nationally competitive Olympic weightlifter, as well as a tremendous photographer. Julian and I talk in this podcast about what it was like to grow up as a rancher in South Texas, where he learned his work ethic from, his views on what the future may hold, both for the legal profession and also for business in general, and what kind of changes we might be looking at as a result of this pandemic. I think you're really going to like this podcast. Julian is a really, really interesting and smart guy and has a lot of good things to say. And now I give you Julian C. Gomez. Brian Beckham at VB Attorneys here. I've got one of my closest friends, longtime friends, Julian Gomez. Julian, how you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm doing good. So thanks for being on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and you're in demand for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is your legal skills. But before we get into talking about what you do as a lawyer and some of those things, can you, and I've already introduced you a little bit, but can you just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what you do, things of that nature?
Absolutely. But thank you very much for having me, Brian. I'm honored to visit with you. You are one of my closest and dearest friends, and I feel the same way about you. And thank you. I'm from South Texas. With my daughter, we've been down here for about 10 generations. My family came from Spain and the Canary Islands around 1740, and we have been ranching in South Texas ever since. And I mention that because that's really a big part of who I am. But I'm a lawyer down here. I mainly do automotive product liability work and then any kind of catastrophic personal injury. But beyond that, the thing that I'm probably most proud of is that I think I'm a damn good son and a damn good father.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things I've always admired about you, Julian, is my father was a single father. My mother passed away when I was 10, so he had to raise my father. He had to raise my brother and I by himself. And I've seen you raise Avery as a single father, and man, I tell you what, she is a heck of a kid. She just got an A&M, didn't she?
She did.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. So not only are you a full-time practicing lawyer, a competitive power lifter, a power Olympic lifter, right?
Olympic lifting.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Olympic weightlifter. You're also a world-class tarpon fisherman, and you're a great guy overall. So you've got quite a resume. But tell us a little bit about 10 generations of Gomez's in South Texas. Tell us a little bit about how growing up in South Texas or growing up in the family you did, how that influenced the way you look at the world now.
Well, I can't really remember a time. Well, I was born in Dallas. My dad's a surgeon, and we came back to South Texas when I was right before I turned 7 years old. I cannot remember a time since I was 7 or we came back to South Texas that I haven't had to have a job.
Yeah.
And from shining shoes to washing cars to pumping gas to working in a grocery store, a bicycle shop. But I really spent the vast majority of my time as a kid working at the ranch. And maybe some people might have complained about it or something, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And I got to spend time with my grandparents. Um, and my grandfather, in particular, my paternal grandfather, his name was Papo. Um, we'd spend our days bouncing around in the truck, and he was always trying to teach me something. And those lessons were always anchored by a little saying or a dicho, we would call them, a pearl of wisdom. And it's funny that at 46, lessons learned at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old really have formed the cornerstone of my life. And I think they probably formed the cornerstone of my daughter's life.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we were talking about that a little bit before we went on the air, actually there's a saying. It sounds much better in Spanish, but you actually put one of those sayings in my head, and that was clear contracts make good friendships. And so it really is remarkable how those kind of things that you hear from your parents or your grandparents or people that influence you when you're young, they really, really do stick in your head, essentially your whole life, I think. So tell us what you talk about working on the ranch. What was it like for those of us city slickers that don't know much about ranches and things of that nature? What was it like? What were you doing as a kid out on a ranch? I mean, some of us have this picture in our mind of maybe like city slickers and Billy Crystal and stuff like that. But what was it actually like to work a ranch in South Texas as a kid, especially during the summer?
Well, it was hot, but I don't think it was as hot then as it is now. But it was definitely hot.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter, right? It really didn't matter. You'd wake up early, and you would drive to the ranch. A big part as a kid, your responsibility would be stuff like opening up gates, right? And so to get into the land, there's fences and you have gates and you go from one pasture to another pasture to another pasture. And so your job a lot of times was to open up gates. And your days consisted of a few things, right? You have to make sure that the animals have water. If there's no water, then that's not good for the animals. You got to make sure the animals have food. And you should only have so many animals on your land that they could just eat the grass and you don't really have to feed them or supplement them. But because it was hot and dry, a lot of times that didn't happen. And you could train your cattle to be nicer. So you feed them, they're called mascarrote, or little range cubes or cake. And you put them in a 5-gallon bucket, you'd shake them up and the cattle come, just like a dog.
Yeah.
You can train them. But so you'd spend your day, you'd wake up, you'd check the water, you'd make sure the fences are all right, you'd feed the cattle, and then inevitably something is always broken. It's always broken. And so you spent your day having to fix whatever was broken, whether it was a fence, it was a water pump, some kind of generator, a windmill, whatever it may be, you spent the rest of your morning trying to fix that. And that's where I feel like a lot of my resourcefulness came out. So let's say there was a busted pipe, right? So now if you had a busted pipe, you'd call the plumber, right? Well, I know how to fix a busted pipe, but I don't need to call a plumber.
Yeah.
And sometimes, well, maybe you didn't have the fitting to replace it. So you might take an inner tube, for example, and wrap that around the pipe very, very tightly, and then wrap that inner tube with wire, and that would keep the water in there, and that would be good enough to keep it working for another month or two before you had to replace it with the right stuff. Those would do that. And then in ranching, what you sell is cattle.
Yeah.
So like hamburger meat or steaks they come from an animal. And that was the fun stuff. Working cattle is fun.
Working cattle's fun, yeah.
Oh, working cattle's fun.
So let me ask you this question. So when I was in high school, I had 2 jobs. One of my jobs was I worked as a dishwasher for a summer at a restaurant. And the other job I had was, it used to be that people would have these like decorative rocks instead of grass in their front lawn. And so my job was in the middle of the summer when people decided they didn't want the rocks, they wanted a regular yard. My job, I would go in with a crew and literally shovel rocks out of people's yards in the middle of the summer.
It's
And
tough work.
very tough work. And I'll tell you what it did. I learned at a very young age that I wanted to work with this instead of this, right?
So
That's what that taught me. So I was going to ask you, like, what working ranches in South Texas in the summer when you're a young kid, what influences do you think that had on what you're doing now?
Well, so my dad did not let me have a job with air conditioning until I had a college degree.
Really? Wow. Tell us about
Really?
it. Yeah.
Well, so we were both at A&M. We were both in the Corps, right?
Yeah.
And so I
And
guess
you were working at A&M too. I remember you worked even when we were at A&M. You were still working. You worked all the way through college.
I did. So I was a welder, and so I would sneak out of my window at night. I'd jump out of the dorm. I'd go weld at night, and then I'd come back, sleep a little bit, do the Corps in the morning, go to class, and the next day.
I was always so jealous because you always had such nice stuff, and I was too dumb to figure out the reason you had nice stuff is because you worked hard for it.
I was high cotton back then. I was making $9 an hour in college, and I thought that was big time.
Yeah.
But going back in high school, I welded. I took care of people's animals in the morning and the after school. I'd go to the ranch in the summer times. In junior high, I worked, like I said, at a gas station outside filling gas. I remember complaining to my dad saying, well, they won't hire me somewhere. He's like, I don't care if they pay you or not. He just made sure that I was outside working and sweating so that I could appreciate this stuff.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
And so you went to A&M, and you truly have a fascinating work history. I mean, I think you work as a futures trader for a little bit in college.
I did. When I got out of college, I went to Chicago. An interesting story, I guess, somewhat in itself.
Yeah.
But I was supposed to work for a company called Cargill, and their meat department, which at the time was called Excel. On the way to Chicago, my truck broke down, and called them up and told them that I was, I guess, disabled for a day or two, and they said no problem. I showed up to Chicago for my job, and they told me your job's gone.
Wow.
You gave it to somebody else. I was like,
really?
Excuse me, I just rented an apartment, a parking space for my truck, and thankfully I ended up working for a company called Iowa Grain, and spent some times down there in the pits, and that's gone. There's no more live trading.
Yeah.
Where you saw that. So this would be there's not selling it for, right? You sell it at 2.5, or you buy it 2.5, right? This is 6, 7. So using the hand signal, I'm buying it at 7.5, or buying it 2.5.
Just like in the movies, right?
Just like in the movies.
Yeah.
And so you did that, buying, selling.
Yeah.
But it's gone. Now it's all done with computers and over the phone. But I did get an opportunity to work in the live pits and learned again some great lessons, right? One of probably the best lesson that I learned out of the pits was a lot of times people really commit to a certain position and they will fight to the death.
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's because what you do is you fight to be able to fight another day.
Sure.
The way how the futures market works is if you have, let's say, $1,000, and if at the end of the day, if you lose, right, you bought something that was worth 1,000. At the end of the day, if it's worth 750, all you have is $750.
Yeah.
And if you had something that's worth 750, and now it's worth 500, again, you lose those 250, and then you have something that's worth 250, then it goes back, and you can get negative where you've actually got a margin call and you've got to come up with money. And so that's really what the point is you never want to deplete your bank where you have nothing left to fight. You always want to, if you're in a bad position, get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
That's
and
that,
that,
you know, that's excellent advice. I think there's, you know, I've seen, it seems like a little bit of a mental phenomenon to people that they dig into any position, you know, whether you're a trader or whether it's a political position or a philosophical position or even like a judge or a lawyer, that, you know, the ability to change your mind when presented with new information and to abandon a position that you hold pretty strongly quickly is a superpower. And
look, we've been working together for quite some time, and we've done a lot of cases together. There's
yeah,
been multiple cases where we've started and we thought it was wonderful.
yeah,
We get into it and we're like, we got to get out. We need to get our expenses. If we put a little bit of money in the client's pocket, wonderful. If we make some money, great. But this case is not what it is. That ability to not be wed to a particular position, I feel like I really learned that in Chicago. It was a guy named Bill Sapola that taught me that.
yeah,
He was a pork belly trader, and he was like, "You fight to fight another day. You never
yeah,
fight to the death." It's like if you're in a bad position, get out. If you're in a good position, you let that ride, and
yeah,
that's actually kind of counter how most people do it. Is that they're in a good position and they've done pretty well, so they get out. It's like,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
you sit in that one until it's done, and they'll sit in bad positions and keep on going back into it and back into it and back into it. It's like, no, get out, move on to the next one.
yeah. And that's, you know, that's actually something that's been studied for a long time. The fear of loss is way more powerful than the joy of gain. And so people will literally, given the exact same risk profile and the exact same odds, they will bet that they will try to avoid loss much more than they will try to acquire gain, because like I said, the fear of loss is psychologically much more troubling, even if it's the exact same mathematical formula. Okay, so Julian, super interesting background, but that gets us up to, so you go to law school and
On a bet, I lost a bet. That's how I
okay,
got to law
yeah,
school.
tell us about that.
Well, so I was in Chicago, and so my grandfather, right? So we're going back 3 generations now, or 4 if you think of my daughter. So my grandfather wanted to be a doctor, and my great grandfather was the vice president of the Alice National Bank. Um, and the Depression hit, and he could not afford to keep my grandfather at the University of Texas. So he brought him home, and my grandfather went to work for a man, it was a clothing store that he worked for when he was like 4 or 5 years old. My great grandmother died in childbirth, or during the influenza. Actually, it wasn't childbirth; it was during the influenza pandemic. But so my grandfather started working at like 4 or 5 years old. But so my grandfather, having come back from the Depression, almost, my dad wanted to be a doctor. It was definitely his calling, but he always would tell my dad that there was security in being a professional, and that cualquier rascuache, that means like no matter how bad you are, you would always be able to make a living. And so my dad really kind of instilled that into me. He was like, look, if you want to be a trader, you can be a trader. Just go get a law degree and come back. And I was
Yeah,
like, look, I had that horrible experience where I was a day late to getting to work. They gave my job to somebody else. There's no way that they would take me back. And he's like, well, I'll bet you. You ask them. If they say yes, I'll pay for it. If not, I won't bug you about it again. And
nice.
well, I went and asked my boss. His name was Tom. Hey, Tom, you know,
Yeah,
I'm thinking about going to law school. If I go to law school, could I have my job back? He was like, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you right after law school.
Dad knows better.
Yeah. So, it just happened.
Yeah, well, good. So you go to law school. Do you have any lawyers in the family, or was this something that you had planned?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah,
Again, I had thought I was going to become a doctor like my dad. I had the A's in organic chemistry there at Texas A&M, and then I just kind of fell in love with cattle and with trading. That's really
Yeah.
what I had wanted to do. And then my dad, um, cattle is a tough way to make a business,
Yeah.
make a living. And he saw that, and I think he wanted me to have some security. And then again, always having to have a job in law school, I fell in love with what we do now.
Yeah.
It was just the right fit for me at the right time.
So let's talk about, I want to shift just a little bit because you have one of what I consider to be one of the coolest legal practices in the country. I mean, you're essentially a solo practitioner, but it's not, it's almost like you have a 300 or 400 lawyer law firm, because you take on literally some of the largest companies in the world in some of the most complex, expensive, convoluted litigation that is out there, including, I think it's generally accepted that you are, if not the number one expert in the country, one of the top 2 or 3 experts in the country in autonomous vehicles, like self-driving vehicles and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about, and I think this is particularly relevant nowadays, while a lot of us are working from home. How are you able to set up a practice in South Texas that enables you to take on these massive cases, essentially as a solo practitioner? Like, how do you do that?
I didn't know that I couldn't.
Yeah.
And that's probably, I mean, the answer. So out of law school, I clerked for a federal appellate court judge. And when I interned for him in law school, and I knew that I wanted to have that on my resume, but he was older. And so I remember calling him up when he offered me the job, and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I clerk for a federal district court judge?" And he was like, "Yes, you can do it before you do mine." I was like, "No. You're
first. Yeah.
You're first.
Smart. Yeah.
You're first."
Yeah.
But when I finished with him, I went and did some asbestos work for a little bit. But then I took this second clerkship, and that judge that I worked for, when I took the oath in chambers and I walked into the courtroom, that was the tail end of the first Ford Explorer Firestone case in the country. And
for people who may not be familiar with the Ford Firestone cases, just tell us briefly what that involved.
Sure. So the Ford Explorer and the Firestone tire were sold. The tire was original equipment on the Ford Explorer in the 90s. The Ford Explorer was part of the Bronco 2 platform. Ford worked with Firestone to develop the Wilderness tire, and what wound up happening was the tread of the Wilderness tire would come off. The Explorer would start bouncing, it would lose stability, the vehicle would roll over, and unfortunately there was all kinds of problems within the vehicle, like the seats, the roof, the seat belts, the glass, and folks would pass away or worse.
It scares the heck out of me, because I came into the practice of law right kind of near the end of that, but I actually drove a Ford Explorer in college for 2 years, and I found out, 6-7 years later, how dangerous those cars were. Like, you literally have no idea some of the time about some of these products we all use, like how dangerous they really are, because the manufacturers sure as heck don't say anything about it. So in any event, you were clerking for the district judge, and he was finishing up the Ford Firestone.
And so what
trial. Yeah.
I found, and the case was fascinating, right? That's how I'm an auto product lawyer, right?
Yeah.
But what fascinated me most about that particular case, the first one, was that rollover happened in Mexico.
Yeah.
It was a U.S. citizen, U.S. purchased vehicle on vacation in Mexico, and that's where the rollover happened. And so I spent the next year studying forum nonconvenience and choice of law. And from working in law school, I had another friend that I'd met who had a similar case, He asked me if I wanted to do it. I said, yeah. My daughter, who's sitting over there on the couch right now, or laying down on the couch,
Yeah.
um, she was this big. We're living in an apartment. I had that blue Ethernet cable strung out all
Yeah,
over the
sure.
place, and she'd come crawling around and figured out a way to get that case financed. Went to the Fifth Circuit and won. Right,
Yeah.
like just
Big,
I don't know.
big deal, though. Big deal. Yeah.
But I didn't know that I could do it, and that was my first case. It was a double fatality, detread, rollover, and I just was like, "Well, I can do this. I mean, this
Yeah.
isn't that hard."
You didn't know enough to know you didn't know enough, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly like I didn't know that I couldn't do it, or that I wasn't supposed to do that, or I should have been trying DWI cases first or anything else. I was just like, I'll take a double fatality
Yeah, for
automotive
sure. Yeah.
crimes case.
Spend a couple
I,
$100,000, no problem.
yeah. Why? I mean, well, and so I did. I partnered with somebody else that
Yeah.
financed the case for me. But that lawyer was nice enough. He assigned one of his associates to follow me and basically just make sure I didn't screw up. And she had known me for some time, and so she felt that I was competent enough, and so I just did it
Kind of
on my
random.
own.
Yeah. So let's
And
talk a little bit about, so in addition to, I want to talk about some of your work with autonomous or self-driving cars. But before we get to that, one of the things that that you've always been able to do as a lawyer, which I've admired a lot, is take risks. But they're calculated risks. But you're not one of these lawyers who just sits back and just does things the same way again and again. I mean, you have actually, and I've seen this with my own two eyes, you've actually changed the law in some jurisdictions.
we
So
changed the law.
yeah, no, seriously. I mean, you've actually,
No, we have.
yeah,
Hey, but hang on. It wasn't just me. We've done some of that stuff together.
well,
And the truth is a lot of times I'm working with somebody else. And let me go back to answer your question. How am I able to work like it's a 500 person law firm?
yeah,
I have chosen and have very, very good friends that I work with within the law.
yeah,
There's very, very few cases that I'll do 100% alone. Like I said, we do a lot of work together. I work with Richard Denny a whole bunch.
yeah.
I just work with different folks that have the same passion that I've got, and that aren't afraid to work. There's a lot of people in our business that are scared to work, and the folks that I've been able to surround myself with are not scared of working.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think this is really important for people to hear, particularly people that are thinking about either starting a small business or even a small law firm. What would be your what would be your advice about, okay, I want to start a small law firm, or I want to start a small business, and I'm going to have to collaborate with a lot of different people when I'm doing it. As a practical matter, like how have you kind of set up your life and your firm to make it to where you're able to collaborate remotely? Because right now, obviously, you know, most of us are working remote, and it's a little bit of a change to a lot of us. I think it's definitely not the same as being in an office. You've basically been, quote, remote your entire practice for for lack of a better word. I mean, you've had some office space and stuff like that, but tell us, either what you think the most important things to know about working remotely and collaborating with other people, or like what, if you want to tell us like any practical tips or apps or technology you use, or just kind of general mindset type of thing.
I think that's probably really what it's mindset, and it's the same exact attitude that we just were talking about in working up that first case. I just didn't know that I couldn't do it, and I remember leaving Chicago, and I was looking for a solution so that I could fish and still trade cattle and get real-time quotes, and that didn't exist back in the early or the late 90s. The best that you could do was about a 15-minute delay, which
Not good enough.
is not good enough.
Yeah.
But so you just kept, so my system, if you will, has constantly evolved. It's not the same system I had a year ago, certainly not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago. And when I'm bringing somebody on board, and I have had folks work for me at times, I have a scar right here that you can maybe barely, let's see if we can.
Barely.
You can see that scar right
Barely.
there.
Yeah.
Right. So what happened there was, it was my 16th birthday. I did not have a driver's license. I had been driving for a year already so that I could go to work. And I had some cattle that I was showing at the livestock show in FFA, which is the Future Farmers of America. And I'd run out of feed. And my parents begged me, don't go, they'll be fine. I was like, no, I got to go. I ended up in a car wreck. But this scar, when it itches, you just don't leave it alone. Like you do something about it, right?
Yeah.
Like you satisfy that. And so I'm always looking for solutions. And so, for example, right now, the process that I go through at the end of a case, and again, like we'll split up different work sometimes when we work together. I usually will close our cases dealing with the medical folks and doing all that. Well, it's the same thing over and over again. I'm like, how can a car drive itself, supposedly, and we can't get a computer to spit out the documents that should be going to all of these people automatically and take us through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different steps with if-thens? That doesn't exist. As of today, there's no program that exists for that. But guess what I'm doing tomorrow? I'm meeting with another vendor to try and see if we can figure out some way to make that work. And so that's that desire or that mindset of always trying to figure out how to do it, that not giving up, knowing that there's a solution and keeping on looking for it. And so that's really how I think I've been able to work remotely way before other people were, was that I wanted to be a dad. It was the number one thing I wanted to do in my life. And unfortunately, there's only 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year, right? That's it. And so while quality time is important, you got to have some quantity too. And I had to figure out a way where I could work from home. Look, my daughter loves to dance, right? I had to figure out a way how to be able to sit in a parking lot while she was at dance and work.
Yeah.
And those were that resourcefulness. Again, I learned it as a kid.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that I think people, and so I've struggled with this a little bit recently is, our office has been set up like yours for a very long time to in such a way that we could work remotely if we needed to. So we've been paperless for almost 10 years. We didn't shut down during Hurricane Harvey. We didn't shut down. We had a fire in our building. We haven't shut down during this pandemic at all. That said, I struggle a little bit with having a little bit of face-to-face time with my team. There's something about being face-to-face occasionally that I think there is some benefit to. I can't really put my finger on it, but how do you deal? You travel quite a bit because, like, some of the time when you and I are working on cases together, you come up to Houston and, we'll meet for a whole day about a case. But how do you deal? How do you think about what I'll call 100% full remote, where you literally have no office to go to, versus remote most of the time, but also having some of that human interaction? In other words, how do you as a solo practitioner get that face-to-face time?
So you were talking about studies a little bit earlier. There is unspoken communication, whether that is pheromones or hormones that our body's emitting and we're picking up, whether it is subtleties in our facial expression or our hand gestures that we can't really see through the computer because you can only see from here up. And I'll give you an example, right? You're seeing me from the chest up.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know what my feet are doing.
Yeah.
If we were seeing each other face to face and you saw my feet, you saw.
Oh, I know you're wearing shorts.
Oh, I am wearing shorts.
Yeah, me too. Nice.
But if you could see that in person, you would have known, or you would think, if you saw somebody tapping their foot like that, they'd say,
Yeah.
oh, that person is nervous.
Yeah.
Right. So you definitely need the in-person communication. And I think that's one of the things that people are kind of finding out about what's going on right now.
For me personally, I'm a little bit of a homebody. I'm a little bit of a meditator and a thinker. So, the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was like, hey, this is not that big a deal for me. But even me, who's a little bit of a homebody, I'm at the point now where I just want to get out and do something, right? But anyway, what you were talking about, it's amazing the amount of information that's conveyed non-verbally between humans, right? Body language, facial expressions, even smells, believe it or not.
Right, all of that.
And you lose, you just, even us talking on Zoom, you lose a little bit of that face-to-face contact, and you lose a little bit of information. Now, the flip side of that is, I read something many years ago about a guy who ran a totally remote business. And one of the objections that he heard was, well, how do you know people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? And he said, well, if you're a totally remote business, then the only thing you see is the work product, right? So it's not about whether this person is good around the water cooler or whether this is a fun person to be around in the office. It's 100% about the quality of the work. But I struggle with, and the reason I want to ask you this question, Julian, is because I know tons of lawyers that literally go to the office every single day, 9 to 5, with a bunch of other people in there. So that's kind of the traditional way of doing it. You're the exact opposite of that. And I struggle a little bit with finding some sort of balance between working remotely, but also having that personal, in-person connection occasionally. So one of the things you do is you do a lot of speaking. You're a pretty in-demand speaker. And so tell us a little bit about how the speaking that you do fits in with your practice.
Absolutely. But I want to mention something else before we leave that other topic, because it reminded me of something. So I do think you're going to have as much human to human kind of stuff. And what I think you're going to see is kind of a pivot or a switch in the way how offices are set up.
Yeah.
So let's take our kind of work.
This is great, because this is exactly, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I really want to hear what you have to say about this.
So let's take Patty, your superstar, literally the National Paralegal of the Year, right? Yeah. Superstar,
yeah.
Right? So Patty's been remote for you for Friday for 3 or 4 years now?
At least. I think a little bit longer than that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, we took a remote deposition in that Yokohama case, and that's like 2007.
Yeah, we did. I remember that. As a matter of fact, I remember it used to be when you wanted to do a remote deposition, you'd have to go to a physical location with all sorts of special equipment, and they'd have to set it up, and it cost thousands and thousands of dollars. I mean, it was a huge thing to take a remote deposition 10 years ago.
It's longer than that, Brian. That was that Yokohama case with the lawyer from New York. But that mindset has been between us, and I guess no one can see what that does. That's because our pictures are side by side. I'm like, that's between us, right? That's the stuff in person. So what I think is going to want, you're going to change the way how space is set up. Yes. So do I need my own office with my own chair, with my own pictures behind me, if I'm only there once a week? And I don't think that I do. And so, but neither does necessarily your staff. And so I think you'll maybe see like a few communal type of rooms where you could have maybe one person in each corner, and you'll maybe then have a separate room if somebody needs to have a telephone conversation so that they're not bugging other folks. And then you really need a conference room or somewhere to either take depositions or meet with clients, and that's it, and a waiting room.
Yeah.
But I think where you have offices that have all of this other wasted space that's not used right now, if I could short commercial real estate rental rates, then I'm pretty sure you probably could find somebody to do that. I would. I just don't think that's businesses. I'm an economist by training, and so the economics of having this, people have figured out, is it perfect? No. Can I do it for some things? Yes. And so you're saying, well, I travel a whole bunch. I had 121 flights last year. I had 17 speaking. Yeah. It is a lot. Yeah. 17 speaking engagements.
You and George Clooney. Up in the air.
Up in the air, right? And so I run continuing legal education for the Texas trial lawyers and for a group called AIEG. And so I'm able to see kind of the surveys that come back after we have been doing these virtual or remote type of CLEs. They're just as good.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just as good.
Really?
And I've been, yeah.
Yeah.
And
CLEs, for people that aren't involved in the legal community, CLEs it's basically, it's continuing legal education, but it's basically like an industry conference where a lot of people get together and hear from speakers and things like that. At least that's traditionally what it is.
That's exactly what it is. So I don't think you'll be able to replace wholesale conferences because of what we've been taught. People do want to see each other. They want to visit. They want to have a drink with each other.
Yeah.
That's what I think people are really, that's what they want. They're going to want the human interaction, where if you're trying to maybe learn, you'll be able to learn like this. And so the kids, you're going to see more remote learning.
For sure.
And so space, physical space is going to decrease. People aren't going to need as much. It'll be more the community.
And I've been actually thinking about that for years. I live in Houston, and there has been an explosion in skyscrapers in Houston, particularly in West Houston. And it had a lot to do, I think, with, the energy boom, which is now not only dead, but, like dead, like as dead as you can be. And they're building all these buildings, and I just keep thinking, this seems to be like going in the wrong direction. Like we're long before the pandemic, my thought was we have far too much office space already. And why are we building more? Like, who's it for? Like, who's going to sit in all these offices? Because I'll give you a good example in my office of something that I think is an absolute no-brainer. We have a lady named Lauren who works in our office, and she's basically in charge of like 850 Hurricane Harvey clients. She's got a very, very important job. She lives an hour away, and she drives an hour here into the office and an hour back. She could do every single thing she needs to do from her house, everything. There's not one thing that she couldn't do from her home. And so I've started to get to the point where, and she has kids too in high school. So it's important for her to spend time with her kids. So I've actually gotten to the point where I'm like, not only is it way more efficient for her to work from home and not spend 2 hours in traffic, but it's just better for her personally too, because she doesn't have to spend that much time away from her family. So tell us a little bit more about, like you said, you think that offices will be reimagined or reconfigured. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, so let's take Lauren. I think it's a perfect example to use. So she's got 850 folks that she deals with. She probably will occasionally need to see someone. Someone may need to sign something in mass torts. Some of these judges require wedding signatures for something.
Yeah.
So, but does Lauren need her own dedicated space? No, she needs internet, a laptop.
Yeah.
and access to fast internet, access to a laptop, and the right apps on her computer.
Right.
And so she could work 90% of the time from home, but she'll still need a place to come in occasionally to work. Maybe she wants to take a break, right? That's the other thing that we're kind of finding out. It's like, okay, I love my family, I want to be around them, but
good point. Yeah,
right?
good point.
So you're going to have folks who are going to want to come in occasionally, and you're going to need to have that kind of space set up. But if you had 10 people, and let's say you had a dedicated 100 square feet per person because they were there all at the same time, you're not going to have that anymore. You're going to need maybe 500 or 700 square feet, maybe even less.
Yeah.
Because Patty, let's say, will come in on Monday, Tuesday, and then she's going to be gone Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then Lauren will come in, I guess, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and she'll be gone Monday, Tuesday. And so you would only need half of the amount of space.
You know, when I was first starting out as a lawyer, it was one of my dreams to have an office with a couch in it. Like, I thought having a couch in your office, if you had a couch in your office, you had made it, right? And then after that, I wanted a TV in my office. So anyway, when I opened my firm 15 plus years ago, Vic and I both have these massive offices. And I have 2 couches in my office. And I thought it was so neat.
You've double made it.
that I have this great big office. And, you know, a couple of years ago we were expanding and we needed some more office space. And I basically said, I'm only here a couple days a week. I don't need all this space. Just chop my office in half. And so we ended up chopping mine in half. But the point of that is, you know, I used to think it was a mark of success to have a big office with a couch and a TV. And now I realize that that's more just kind of bragging to your colleagues or social signaling. There's really no need for anybody, owner or not, to have some big office space that just totally waste space, you know?
Well, that's actually, I think that's part of what's changing, right?
Yeah.
How do you define success?
Yeah.
Well, I think if you talk, you know, with folks who are a little bit younger versus folks who are a little bit older, folks who are older, I had a corner office, I had a big space.
Yeah.
Folks that are younger, I took 6 weeks of vacation this year and I went to 22 different countries.
There seems to be there's no question about that. There seems to be a shift, and I think that is probably a healthy shift, you know, by and large. I think the young kids, you know, we old folks, I guess we're not old yet, middle-aged folks, Generation Xers, sometimes we have a tendency to criticize the millennials and the younger kids. Oh, they don't work hard enough, this and that. But, you know, in some ways, I think they have a much better perspective on life than we do, because like you and I have always been about family first. Like that's easy. That's no question about that. But then we have a lot of other interests too. So for instance, and let's go ahead and talk about this now. You are a nationally competitive Olympic lifter, like weightlifter, right? And so obviously,
I backed off in the past few months, but I was the state champion in 2017, and
nice.
I spent some time at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs.
So how'd you get into Olympic? I mean, that's really cool. But so the point I was going to make was, you and I both have we have thriving legal practices, thriving small businesses, but we also have a lot of things we're interested in outside of our practices. So how do you get into Olympic weight? Like, first of all, when did you get into Olympic weightlifting?
Late.
Yeah.
I am not an athlete. I'm not. I didn't play football. Like, you played basketball in college, right? I mean, you're an athlete.
Yeah.
I'm not an athlete. I'm a klutz.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I ran track in junior high, and I think I finished like maybe my freshman or sophomore year, and I was like, bye.
You're done. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not an athlete, but CrossFit kind of started coming around, and I don't mind taking risk, but it's intentional or purposeful risk.
Yeah.
And CrossFit had too many skills, right? Like, they had me doing jump rope where you have to jump the rope underneath you twice, right?
Yeah.
I can't do that. They had these things called kipping pull-ups where like I can't even explain it. Like you kick with your lower body
Kick
and
your
it
knees
propel
up.
you.
Yeah.
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 I couldn't figure that out. I'm like, you know what? These Olympic lifts, how many lifts are there? There's 2. Let me learn that.
Yeah.
Well, hang on. I've been doing that for 7 years now or so,
Yeah.
maybe even longer than that. I'm still not really good at it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not like you'll lift, you'll look at the video and you're like, oh my God, how did I not, my body should not have been in that angle. Why would it do that?
Right.
But it was CrossFit, and just, there was too many skills to learn in CrossFit. So I took 2 skills that I thought I could master, which I'm not.
Tell us about tell us about going to the. You went to the Olympic training center as part of your Olympic powerlifting training, right? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Nothing but respect, right? It was like a master's camp for old folks. We got to watch the actual young competitive lifters, and we got to lift with them, with the national coach, and have them kind of critique and work on our skills. But you have rarely seen, or I can't think of ever seeing, a more dedicated group of individuals. And I'm now on the USA Weightlifting Foundation, which is the organization that sends the kids actually to the Olympics. And the amount of dedication that those young kids, that they have.
Yeah.
That's they wake up, they stretch in the morning, they did some yoga type work, they would work out for a couple of hours in the morning, they would eat, sleep, come back in the afternoon, go back and sleep, and that's it. That's all they do.
Yeah.
And to have that type of laser focus and dedication is I found it very admirable. And so I guess, what did I get out of it? Well, I became a slightly better lifter, but I really came away kind of recognizing like excellence in other people, and you can see it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can just see excellence in other folks. You're like, all right, that's I want to emulate that. And I think there was actually something very interesting about Chicago. When I traded, a lot of the other traders were collegiate athletes because they wanted folks that were aggressive and not afraid to make decisions, right? You're gonna screw up.
Yeah.
The trick isn't not screwing up. The trick is, after you screw up, what do? When you get yourself up, right? Like I didn't play football, but you got knocked down, or basketball, you got knocked down. What'd you do? You got back up and you stood up. You took a shot, you missed the thing. What do? The next time you're right
Move
there.
on. So what? Yeah.
Yeah. That type of skills, you can see that in other folks, and I saw that there, and it kind of, maybe it and I hadn't thought about it until right now. Maybe it rejuvenated me. Maybe I got more out of that than I thought I did.
You know, I have a similar experience, and so one thing I've noticed is, like, I'll bet you when you see Olympic lifters, you see technique, like you see like the art of it almost. And we're people like me who don't know a whole lot about the technique and the training. We just see strong people lifting a lot of weight, right? And so I started something similar in January, and it's probably one of the things I missed the most during the pandemic. I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in January.
Right.
And, you know, it used to be, which, by the way, is completely and totally addictive. It is absolutely a blast. I'm totally addicted to it. But it used to be I'd watch these MMA matches, and now I like MMA too. And it would just be like, look like a bunch of guys rolling around on the floor and punching each other, and that was that. But now, when I watch them, I watched 5 or 6 MMA jiu-jitsu fights last night on YouTube. Now I see the technique. Like, now I see that the reason this guy is winning is because he's doing this with his foot, and he's doing this with his shoulder, and he's got his weight over here, and he's predicting that the guy is going to make this move, and so he's setting up to catch that move and do this move. And it becomes like this, it's fascinating how this whole new world opens up to you. So I've always thought it was good for people as they get older to try new things and fail at new things, but learn new things, because you really, I was reading something yesterday, Julian, about how if you want to live a deep life, you should devote yourself to a craft or crafts, whether that's your profession, whether that's a hobby or whatever it is, but to be really, really, really good at something and to work constantly to get better. I think that's that's a pretty good way to live your life. And so, but that's cool about the the Olympic lifting. So real quick, because I'm cognizant of your time. I know you've got a call coming up. Let's talk. I want to make sure we talk about this at least a little bit. Autonomous cars, self-driving cars. You've literally been on the forefront of this for years now. Tell us a little bit about your involvement in self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles, and kind of what you've been doing for the past few years along those lines.
Well, you can really only kind of connect the dots looking backwards, right? There's prospectively is, it's tough. But I ran AAJ, which is the American Association of Justice's product section, several years ago, maybe almost 10 now. And because of that, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had reached out to one of the attorneys for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, had reached out to me and had asked if we spotted any issues with any automobiles to please let them know so that they could do that. And that formed a relationship with an attorney there that I had. And when autonomous vehicles first kind of came on the radar screen, they weren't on mine. There's a lawyer in Dallas by the name of Lou Brown who was running AIEG, which is the Attorney Information Exchange Group, which is the equivalent of the National Association of Plaintiffs Automotive Products Liability Lawyers. He put together a small team of folks to start going to Washington to talk with NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, about issues that potentially they weren't aware of, so that we could protect consumers. And at that time, and still even today, the designers and the manufacturers of these vehicles and the component parts are asking the government for immunity for promises, right? Not even for guarantees, right? They're saying, well, if we have these autonomous vehicles, that we promise that less people are going to be injured. For this promise, we need immunity. We need to be protected. And
that
so
sounds like a terrible idea to me, but.
Oh, it is. Because the truth is that they're not less.
Yeah.
At least not by data.
But even if they weren't, I mean, just trust me, and you're going to give me complete immunity for the rest of history based on just trust me. I mean, that just sounds like an awful idea.
And thankfully it violates the 7th Amendment. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with it. But that was where it really started, was that I had developed a relationship with an attorney there, in the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, and started bringing to their attention autonomous vehicles. And the first time that we went to NHTSA to go talk with them about it, like it wasn't even on their radar. They weren't even thinking, because the way how the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards are written, they're written in mind that there is a human being who is a driver and then passengers. And so cars are required to have things like steering wheels. They're required to have things like brakes. They're required to have different items that contemplate that a human being is actually driving the car, as opposed to the car driving itself, or the computer in the car driving. But that's kind of where it got started. And then we just started making regular trips up there to go and share with them what we had learned. And one of the one of the big law firms that represents one of the automotive manufacturers hired that attorney away, and And I remember having a conversation with him on a personal level, and he was very torn. But the reality is you've got to take care of your family first, and that was kind of the advice that I gave him. Kind of
Yeah.
went on his own, and now go around sharing what information I've learned that's out there, because the truth really is kind of different than what the marketing or the public relations information is that's out there. They're just,
They're not the same. Yeah.
they're not the same. Is that there's a great book that's out there by a guy named Frank Lutz. I used to work in Washington in 1995, and the Republicans came in and they swept out the Democrats out of the House. That was with Newt Gingrich, Contract with America.
Yeah.
Frank Lutz is the guy who came up with that phrase. And he
Words
wrote a book.
Yep.
Right. It's not what you say, it's what people hear.
Right.
That's
facts. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly. So I was on the agriculture committee, right? I was the assistant economist. It was freedom to farm. There's no freedom to farm.
Yeah.
You just get rid of farm subsidies.
Yeah.
And so with what these companies have learned is that we can say one thing, right? This car is self-driving, but that doesn't mean that it drives itself.
Yeah.
Right? But all that people hear is self-driving.
Yeah.
And so they figured out, well, this markets, this sells. We can pump this out, and as long as we put a warning, well, then we're fine. Thankfully, the safety hierarchy for engineers says that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But for selling vehicles, game on.
All too often, my experience has been companies get into trouble when marketing and engineering don't agree. Like when marketing gets the upper hand on the engineers or the operational people. Well, Julian, so let's talk a little bit, because we're running really short on time. Talk a little bit about what your advice is to people during the pandemic and quarantine in terms of just whether it be professionally, whether it be moving your business forward, whether it be personally. What are you trying to do, to kind of keep going forward professionally and also to stay sane personally?
I had it, and I can't remember who, you may have given it to me, but there was a 1996 article that came out in the Harvard Business Review that talked about what companies that have lasted, what are some of the commonalities of them. And
yeah, that's Jim Collins, I think, Built to Last, I think. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. And so you have to have ulterior motive or purpose. And if you don't, everything just kind of falls apart. So my purpose at my law firm is to use the law to make people's lives better.
Yeah.
Simple, right? That's what it is. And so it hasn't changed, right? Our purpose still is the same, is we're still trying to use the law to make people's lives better. In particular, have we done some different things? Well, absolutely. I think this is, I don't know, my sixth or seventh kind of podcast or CLE or webinar that I've given during this time trying to share information. Worked with the courts, worked with our local mediators, worked with defense counsel, trying to get them set up so they can work remotely. But it has still been that same underlying purpose of use the law to make people's lives better. And then I guess the other part, or the second answer to your question, what am I doing to kind of stay sane? One of the best investments I've probably ever made was I bought some very nice weights, a brand called Alico, which is like just top of the line weights.
Yeah.
I converted my garage from a place to keep a car to a place to keep some weights and fishing equipment.
Yeah.
And I lift 4 to 6 days out of the week.
Yeah.
I also go and I walk for 30 minutes every morning regardless. And I try to sleep.
Yeah.
I really try to focus on getting 8 hours of sleep a night, eating healthy, and healthy is kind of relative. I mean, I eat a relatively high protein, low fat, low carbohydrate, high vegetable kind of diet with as few processed foods as possible, and wake up and do it again.
It's kind of, it's not that complicated when you really get down to it. Exercise, sleep, and eat right. Although it is a little bit
have
harder.
good purpose. Have good purpose.
Have good purpose too. Yeah, no doubt about that. And a matter of fact, the purpose of your law firm, use the law to make people's lives better, is even more important now. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah. So Vuk and I have been thinking a lot over the last month about whether there are things that we can do as a law firm that would be really helpful to people. And so we're kind of on the lookout. Now, of course, we're still doing our bread and butter personal injury, wrongful death type cases, but there's going to be a lot of other things, I think, that people are going to need help with on the legal front as we kind of come out of this as a country, that we want to be prepared to help people. So, well, Julian, we're a little bit over our time actually, but let me just say this has been a real pleasure. It's great talking to you. You're a source of inspiration for me. You have been for 25 years now. And I appreciate your friendship, and I know your time is super valuable, so I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Before I let you go, tell people where they can find you.
Well, I live in McAllen, Texas,
Yep.
so I don't think anyone's really going to be coming down here. So you can find me on the internet. The website is www.jcgl as in law, F as in firm.com. My telephone number is 956-331-2500. You can call, text, fax that telephone number, and we'll get back with you. But look, if I can help anyone with stuff, lawyer, non-lawyer, that's what we're here for. Kind of my favorite story in the Bible is a story about the talents, and the talent that we have as attorneys is being able to use the law. And so that's kind of what we're supposed to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, my brother. We'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. Bye-bye, man.
Touch soon. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckham. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.